Hello, everybody. This is Philosophy15. I am Robert Talese.
I'm Scott Aiken.
We are two philosophy professors at Vanderbilt University, and this is a series of unscripted, as if that weren't obvious, 15-minute conversations about varied philosophical topics. And today, we're going to spend some time talking about relativism. What about it?
What about it? So, relativism looks like it's a kind of philosophical view that's tempting in a lot of cases, and sometimes one that maybe can survive some degrees of scrutiny, maybe with particular areas. All relativism is a view about the truth makers of certain judgments. Usually we think of judgments having truth makers other than the judgment, usually what they're about or something like that. But in the cases of relativism, that the truth is in some ways in the taking. The truth taking is in the making. So they're relativized to the judges. So those who judge are those who make the things true, and it makes it so that there's a kind of a flatland between all of the rest of the views, that they're all in some ways equally good. That it's a great way to be able to manage certain kinds of disagreements. You could say, like, look, I see why you're saying what you're saying. I can see why and there's in some ways kind of no disagreement there. With matters of taste is sometimes one of the first places to start with, where relativistic judgments are, is that you'd say, look, one of the reasons why people have the taste they have is because of the fact that they've got the taste buds they have and the associations and so on, that the goodness and the goodness of a taste depends on the taster. And so whether or not chocolate is tasty is something that does depend on the person judging the chocolate or judging the dessert or judging the dish. And there can be other objective matters, whether or not it's authentic or whether or not it's heavily salted or maybe even whether or not it's good for you. But there are other factors that are matters that really just do depend on the one judging. Namely, and again, we can have these in localized areas. And so we in fact think that if the truth making is in the truth taking, then there's really kind of no place for, we can have the disagreements, but it doesn't look like there's a place for reason to kind of claw the other person to your side. It's it looks like, again, in Latin they say in gustibus non disputatum, that's the thought is that there's no room for rational arguments. Like it's all kind of equally good.
And no way for the person to whose judgment the truth is relativized to make a mistake.
Right, that's right. Yeah, it's not just that they're all true. It's like you can't be wrong about whether or not chocolate's tasty.
Right.
And think about, and I mean, in some ways, there's sort of two features to this. It's a kind of a no-fault disagreement phenomenon, and it looks like in terms of just being able to kind of have interpersonal management skills, being able to have a class for those cases where you've got no-fault disagreements, where you'd say, like, we're kind of both right whenever you see it from the right, you kind of squint at it right and see it from the right perspective. And also that in some ways, reasons in some ways are make it so that these disagreements can't kind of really be touched robustly by the reasons. It's not like, so my oldest daughter just doesn't like chocolate. I find that very weird. And I've given her plenty of arguments as to why chocolate is tasty. For some reason, that seems to have not moved her taste buds one way or the other. And so taste is in some ways a kind of a place where the intuition behind relativism can kind of get going.
But so this looks like the easy case for the relativist, precisely because it's clear that when we're talking about what tastes good or not, it's unclear whether we could be referring to anything other than
what's happening,
some fact about our interior life.
Yeah, right.
Right, and it looks as if the claims about the tastiness of chocolate or the tastiness of some piece of chocolate over some competing piece of chocolate, looks like those claims are not really, at the end of the day, about the chocolate, the stuff in the world.
Right.
They're referring ultimately to what's inside and who could know better than us what's inside?
Right. The truth making is in the taking. It's like, I'm the taker. And so,
But I guess that there are other realms where it looks like a relativist analysis is tempting, where it's not so clear that the referent of the supposedly relativist judgment is something that's so strictly interior.
Right.
Like the funniness of a joke.
Good.
Right. So typically we think, well, what jokes are, not everybody thinks this, but typically we're talking about relativism. Relativists think that humor is one of these sort of this low-hanging fruit for the relativist doctrine. There's no fact of the matter, we sometimes say, about whether a particular joke is funny. A particular joke is funny if, now here's where things get a little bit weird.
Yep. And
because it's not if some particular guy laughs at it.
Yeah, someone could laugh inappropriately at a joke.
That's right.
And be wrong about whether or not that was funny.
That's right. It seems like it's much more, it's about, a joke is funny if a certain relevant number of people laugh at it. And if an audience laughs at it, it's funny.
And theories of jokes wouldn't make sense if you'd say something like, what jokes are breaking a pattern or something, some sort of unexpected breaking of a pattern.
That's right.
And so a theory of a joke wouldn't make sense if we didn't think that there was something objective about the verbal presentation of it or the physical act of it.
That's right. But it does look as if in the case of jokes, on the relativist analysis, it seems at least plausible to me what the relativist needs to say is that the humor of the joke is relativized to a group of people, not just a single guy with taste buds or with the right kinds of machinery in his brain, right? But to an audience, to a particular group of people. That is the item, that is the entity to which the relativist judgment is relativized. The disposition to laugh among some group.
And it does seem like there can be ways to still judge those things, even if you concede you might say still the indexing element, that the taking is in the making is in the taking, but in this case kind of the shared taking. But in some ways we can still evaluate it, and maybe even getting back to taste, that instead of thinking about it in terms of true or false, you could think about them in terms of being puerile or mature.
Right.
So you could be like, look, you have that sort of, like, we go back to taste and you're like, hey, whenever you were a child, you liked just sweetness.
Right.
But now you're like, but I want something complex and some interesting element to it. It's like, bro, you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. But, and the same thing goes with jokes, right? Where it's like, you've got like, we might even think that like, there's the fart humor or something like that. And then there's some other kind of humor that's different from, and in some ways maybe more mature, that there's something more complex and maybe satisfying in that kind of higher order pleasures sort of sense, where we'd say, look, we can still individualize them, but we can in some ways still grade them, and there's something maybe objective about the complexity of the tastes, both in terms of the jokes and in terms of the tastes.
That's right. And this is why I think, and maybe this is ultimately the small end of a wedge against the relativized conception of humor, at least.
Right.
Because it doesn't seem to me to be a mistake, a conceptual error, to say, go back and watch, pop cultural products, comedy films from the 80s.
Appalling.
Right, or a comedy routine from the 80s that involves a lot of jokes about gay people.
Yeah.
And just like...
Now this is an interesting one where now we've got, in some ways, the sort of the overlap of
let me just say,
two domains. Yeah.
But wouldn't we say in those cases is like they found it funny and were wrong to do so?
Yes.
It wasn't funny. They found it funny.
They found it funny.
That's
they were reveling in their vice.
Yeah, they found something funny.
Yeah.
But that's not funny.
So yeah, I'm kind of torn about these things. You might say sort of like, we'll start with the sort of the phenomenon of the sexist joke. On the one hand, I'm pretty sympathetic with the thought that you just got out, which is that that's not funny for non-humor reasons, but for
moral reasons. That you might say the moral norms trump out and erase the humor norms. But it does seem to me that at least it doesn't seem like a conceptually irresponsible thing to say. It seems like a morally weird thing to say, which was, that was a sexist joke. That joke was deeply sexist, but pretty funny.
Right.
Like, you can imagine yourself laughing at the joke and saying, I'm a terrible person.
Right, but
It's saying funny, but boo.
Right,
But,
it's just not clear to me on what side of the ledger, relativism or whatever the opposite of relativism. Where do these? Where are we pressed?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Does this count in favor of the relativist or not?
Or not? Yeah.
But maybe
that does look like a hard problem, I think, for both objectivists and relativists. I think that but even if you think that there is an objective fact about whether or not jokes are funny, and if that's the case, it seems to me that it's possible that you can have an objectively funny joke, but be immoral, but also be objectively immoral.
Right. No, that seems right. So I guess the question then for relativists is, if we concede that there's something to the relativist analysis of sort of statements about taste and claims about humor, something.
Yeah.
Do we just ride that horse? I mean, do we just say, okay, statements about the capital of France?
Yeah. Well,
statements about
So we've
how
seen
many
it as
people are in the room.
Yeah, we've seen it as a plausible thought with some limited domains. How big do the domains get?
And I take it that the relativist, I take it that relativists want to just be.
This is the program,
right? That every claim gets relativized to some subjectivity.
Yeah. So global relative. Let's call that the global relativist or the sort of the omni-relativist. And so. Again, the puzzle with that one is now going to be sort of two intersecting ones. One is whether or not it's self-refuting.
Right.
It looks like the global relativist is correcting you about correcting the absolutist or the non-relativist about something. It looks like as a dialectical tool, it looks like it's sort of it looks like it's a kind of maybe not a strictly semantic self-refutation, but at least if it's proposed as a correction to absolutism, it's like, hey, absolutist, you're making an error here.
But maybe it is sort of strictly, it's like, here is the objective fact.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that could, and now that's clear that
all claims about objective fact are relativized.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Looks like it is a kind of
self-refuting claim.
Some kind of self-effacing, self-undermining. It might be paradoxical.
Yeah. If it's true, it's false, but it doesn't mean that if it's false, it's true. So it's not going to be paradoxical in that regard.
Right,
It's like its truth guarantees its falsity, and then that's the only street that's a guarantee.
But maybe that's enough.
That's maybe enough to say like there's something screwy about that view.
Yeah.
And then the second part about global relativism is you might say it's got a kind of a livability. Like localized relativisms don't look like they've got a sort of a significant livability challenge. It's like okay, if you're a relativist about taste, fine. Again, the puzzle about how you argue about it or rank them or think of yourself evolving over time is a puzzle for the relativist, but it doesn't look like it defeats it. But it does look like if you're a global relativist, and particularly a relativist about certain kinds of normative judgments about our relations with each other, it does look like there's a livability challenge for the relativist, where it's like the relativist says things like, hey, if you're a relativist, you'll end up being more tolerant. If you're a relativist, you'll be able to manage these. Like even whenever I made the case for relativism at the beginning and said, hey, this looks like it's a sort of a good conceptual tool for our interpersonal toolboxes.
Right.
The thought would be like, is that an objective fact? Should we have? Is it an objective fact that you want that?
And it also, doesn't it threaten the idea of that there's anything at stake in our disagreements? I mean, it seems to like render our disagreements merely occasions where we assert things that have the sound of incompatibility to them. Looks like the relativist view means that the disagreements never involve any real friction.
Right. Yeah, that's right. There's no real friction there. And again, this is one of the challenges about like, it doesn't look like there's any room for argument. So what were we doing from the relativist perspective while we were talking about all this? What was all that? What was the argument for relativism?
Right. Why did we think at some point that there needed or even could be such a thing as an argument for relativism? I think I happen to, I happen to think it's self-defeating as a doctrine.
Yeah, and that's a sort of that's a good Platonic. I mean, certainly, I think that the global relativism has got that.
Right.
The question is whether or not the more localized ones have got a self-defeat problem for them.
I think they do.
They kind of. I mean, I think that they've got. I think that the livability one is the one that I think is the harder one, where it's like, yeah, even if you're a relativist, you think that like even internal to your own self-conception, your tastes have changed and you've got better ones now, right?
That's
Or
right.
like that you've done
You see
something.
yourself as having made an error.
Like past you was not on the right track about something, or that. So I think So I think that there's I'm down with the self-defeat one, certainly with the global style relativisms, but I think that the livability argument is one that's like, it looks like there's something irretrievable about the normativity of our concepts that says, yeah, you gotta be judging against a standard.
That's right, something like that.
Yeah.
Philosophy 15, folks. See you next time.